So I think we can all agree that up and until EverQuest Legends was announced, EverQuest was a bit of a stale franchise. Yes, you got some new TLPs every year. Yes, you got your yearly expansions, but for the most part, the game had gone stagnant. And so I was thinking, hey, well, what can I make a video about? And I ended up watching this video from the CFO of EG7, which is the parent company that owns Daybreak Games and in turn EverQuest. And he's at an investor conference, and he's talking about all the great things that their company's doing to get potential shareholders hyped. And it's a 21-minute video, give or take. And in total, there are exactly 2 mentions of EverQuest. One, he mentioned in passing that in a few years from now, EverQuest will be 30 years old, which, indeed made me feel quite a bit old. And then secondly, he mentioned that EverQuest Legends would be launching in July. And out of 21 minutes, that was it. That really got me thinking, is EG7 getting ready to sell EverQuest? So today I'm going to give you my 4-part plan on what I would do to prep EverQuest to be ready to be sold to a new entity. And plot twist, it turns out that EG7 is actually doing all of those things already. So real quick, if you're new here, welcome. I truly love EverQuest and I make these videos as a hobby. I'm not shilling anything. I like EverQuest and I like talking about it. So yeah, there's that. If you do like what you hear today, please hit the like button. If you dislike it, and subscribe as always if you want to hear more. So let's get to it. Here is my 4-step plan that I would do to either sell EverQuest or to sell Daybreak Games. 1, I'd liquidate all the unprofitable assets that I have and I'd clean house. No one wants stuff that's worthless. 2, I'd seed speculation about my biggest sleeper IP, and I'd actually defend that IP. I'll talk about what that means. Of course, the sleeper IP is EverQuest in this scenario. And 3, I'd demonstrate that EverQuest still has a lot of untapped potential by executing a low-risk, trendy project. And so, like I mentioned earlier, what if I told you that EG7's actually doing all these things? So step 1, liquidating unprofitable assets and cleaning house. Over the last 2 years, EG7 has done a whole bunch of very interesting business moves. It starts off in August of 2024, where they start reducing operations, particularly in Europe, where it's the tax advantage doesn't exist for them. 2, they divest in PlanetSide by selling it clearly to a shell company for $5.9 million, getting it off their books. They start to acquire other games that are making a bunch of money, actually, comparatively, Palia being one of them. They start laying off unprofitable projects. So they did a bunch of layoffs around MechWarrior, which is a part of another one of their businesses. They start reporting their financials in local currency for transparency, which could be looked at in a number of different ways. Maybe it's for shareholders, maybe it's for potential buyers. And then the big one is they buy out the remaining Daybreak tax benefit that they had set up. So they did this weird thing where when they purchased Daybreak Games back in, I think, 2015 or 2016, they came to an agreement where they were going to share this tax break with the people that used to own Daybreak. I think it was Columbus Nova and them. And it's all complicated, but the value of that is effectively all profits in the United States up to 44.6 million over the course of 15 years are tax-free. The biggest problem for them right now is they're not making this much money in the United States, so they can only write off about $1 to $3 million a year. But they went ahead and took care of this, and now they own all of the tax shield. All the tax shield belongs to the entity that is Daybreak Games. And then additionally, very recently in February 2026, they decided to relocate their balance sheet to Canada for tax purposes, and they actually opened up a studio there and are hiring developers for EverQuest at below market rates. You can go check it out on the Ravenwake Games website if you're curious, but they are not paying well, I would say, compared to any job in Silicon Valley. You could make easily, I think, 3 times more than what they're offering, but you get to live in Canada, so maybe the trade-offs are worth it. All those things said, they do more layoffs. And then in April, they go ahead and reduce their CEO and board member compensation. So the CEO, who is also the CEO of Daybreak Games, he got a big pay cut, which is also very atypical, but perhaps again, to make their books look better for a potential buyer. And finally, and I think the most interesting part here is that they complete the sale of PlanetSide through this intermediary that they had. And they sell PlanetSide to Tencent, one of the biggest gaming companies there is on this planet. They own Supercell games, if you're familiar with Clash of Clans on mobile and other things like that. They own League of Legends. They own, dozens and dozens of very, very big IP. So, to them, if they bought it, let's even say at $10 million, it's unclear. We don't know how much they bought it, but that's a very small rounding error that is pretty much irrelevant. So who knows what they'll do with it, if they'll do anything at all with it, but it was a very interesting thing to see. So needless to say, EG7 has been very busy trying to make their business more attractive to a potential buyer. Step 2 that I mentioned, I'd seed speculation about my biggest sleeper IP, EverQuest, and I'd actually defend that IP, something that I hadn't been doing for the last 15 to 20 years. Let's talk about creating the speculative value first with hype. There's been two formal mentions of EverQuest III so far. One was an investor day slide where I would just mention, hey, we're doing some R&D about the next iteration of EverQuest. And then two, there was this super weird style, almost like faux hidden camera interview with Dark Paw's studio chief Jen Chan, where she reveals a whole bunch of details about EverQuest 3, that it is in, pre-production, that they are thinking about it as the Elden Ring of MMORPGs. But I get the point. They're saying, hey, it's a hardcore MMORPG. And she drops all these other details, and she does it to something that's like behind a very big paywall on Patreon. Kind of strange. And then, of course, very recently I saw this in San Diego this weekend. There is going to be a panel about EverQuest Legends, and they haven't done this since EverQuest turned, I think, 25. So they are continuing to try to push on the hype train publicly that EverQuest is not a dead franchise and that it has value. So in business law, if you do not defend your copyright, you can lose your copyright. You have to prove that you're actively using a copyright. You just can't kind of sit and camp on it for all eternity and not do anything with it. They did this when they went after the hero's journey. They actively went out and not only about the copyright, also the IP, which is a different scenario. You don't have to necessarily defend that your IP is your IP, but they went and took aggressive actions against the hero's journey, which had the proven business model that they chose to employ for EverQuest Legends. And additionally, and I think the weirder one, is they went to great lengths here to not only just go after the biggest one, but force the EverQuest emulator community to come to an agreement with them too. And if you read the agreement, it's almost an agreement that you can't actually abide by, that they are now bound to. But effectively it says, you can't reverse engineer the software in order to do what you want to do when you're creating your emulated server. And that's exactly how all of the work that has been done on the EverQuest emulator community has come to be. So kind of a strange thing there. So these would be steps too, that if you're a buyer, you don't want to have to go out and do all this stuff. You don't want to have to go knock on a bunch of doors and get a bunch of terrible PR about how you're going after emulated servers that have been running for decades in some cases and inherit that bad press. So you got to take care of that ahead of time, and they certainly did that. And step 3, I demonstrate that my brand still has untapped potential with a whole bunch of upside with a trendy project. And what do I mean by that? Well, there is a huge moment of classic resurgence right now. League of Legends Classic is underway and they're doing big tournaments and people are hyped. World of Warcraft Classic is talking about potentially having Classic Plus and all this other stuff. It's been around for a couple of years. Old school RuneScape's making tons of cash. And Guild Wars Reforged launched just recently and I think it's doing pretty well. So, all those things said, I would want my brand to be associated with these things that are in the news, these things that people are interested in. And, by pushing this product out, they are doing just that. And I would also take the time to somewhat modernize the IP. So to prove that it still is relevant to an audience that's bigger than just a few guys like me who can't get enough. They went ahead and made the game solo friendly, 4K ready, still hasn't manifested, but supposed to manifest by next week, and fully instanced. So they are making the game something that is appealing to the 2026 crowd. And finally, I would pump the perceived valuation with a great story. This is a fake headline. This is generative AI at play here. But imagine a really nice big headline that says, hey, nostalgia pays off. EverQuest Legends crushes its launch week with over 100,000 copies sold. So once I had all those things lined up, I would go and take the next step of finding a buyer, right? So what would the potential buyers for EverQuest look like? And I think there's 4 potential areas, and they're maybe not all great. First one would be a management buyout. And that is where if there were very passionate people inside of Daybreak Games that have kind of been living perhaps, under the dark auspices of, different management, they would want to buy out the current management and then run it their way. This just happened with Eve. CCP Games broke out from, they had sold to Pearl Abyss, which is an MMORPG maker, and they recently bought the game back. So this is not something that's unheard of. In fact, it's happening right now. And interestingly enough, they got the $120 million for this purchase from Google's DeepMind. Anyway, so a management buyout is a potential, and I don't know who these people would be inside Daybreak Games, particularly because the CEO of Daybreak Games is also the CEO of EG7, to a potential non-US powerhouse. And I think this is the best outcome for EverQuest players in general, where something like a Kakao Games, Nexon, NetEase, one of these Asian gaming companies comes on board. They don't want to necessarily run the day-to-day operations per se, but they want to have yet another successful, MMORPG on their books, and they purchase the IP and improve upon it. I think this is a real target. We saw that Tencent, which is a mega business, purchased PlanetSide, so it's not outside of the realm of possibility. 3, there are a number of domain experts who do this kind of thing. Usually they're contracted though from, larger studios like a Nexon or a NetEase to run the products, but Keyword Studios is one of those and Virtuos is the other, where they are experts either at modernizing really, really old games, or they are experts at running live services for other businesses. The success of Apex Legends and other products along the lines are thanks to these kind of people that run in the background. And finally, perhaps the absolute worst outcome would be if yet another private equity firm purchases EverQuest for just in order to get the about $60-70 million a year of revenue that Daybreak Games generates onto their books. So is EG7 getting ready to sell EverQuest or getting ready to sell Daybreak Games? I'd love to hear what you think. Go ahead and drop in the comments if you think this is a likely scenario or not. And either way, maybe drop in the comments who you would like to see potentially purchase EverQuest. Could there be a Variant Interactive reborn, go back to the glory ages? Obviously, maybe for a number of reasons that's not possible. But thanks so much for your time today. Hope this was interesting. And as always, I will see you in the next one.